Lauren Kennedy here today with Evan New for Tech Teardown. We're doing headlines for Wednesday, November 6th. Let's get right to our top story. Despite 3 consecutive quarters of record operating profits, Samsung shares are mostly flat this year. In an effort to boost investor confidence, Samsung has hosted its first Analyst Day in 8 years to give investors greater insight into its many businesses. What are some of the key storylines coming out of this Investor Day?
Sure. So yeah, Samsung is kind of flat for the year. It's also underperforming the Kospi index, which is the South Korean, which is up about 1% year to date. Samsung has a lot of businesses, so we can only probably cover a couple today. But they've had a lot of pessimism surrounding their business, in part because a lot of their growth has been coming from high-end smartphone, and much like Apple, there's some pessimism in deceleration there, saturation on the high end of the markets.
So Samsung's always played its smartphone unit sales figures pretty close to the vest. What about tablets?
So Samsung did provide some historical tablet data. They shipped 5.8 million in 2011, 16.6 million in 2012, and 17.6 million in the first half of this year. They're targeting 40 million units this year, so they're really expecting to ramp up significantly. Their big goal next year is to become the #1 player in tablets, looking to dethrone Apple. If you look at this year, Apple shipped about 48 million iPads in the first 3 quarters of the year. So they're still definitely not going to be able to beat Apple this year, but there's a chance they can next year if they can continue the momentum they're getting in unit volumes.
So one of Samsung's key advantages, key competitive advantages, is their vertical integration. Do you see any room for room for improvement here?
I would say there's 2 main areas where Samsung is focusing. The software and services is a big part of it. Samsung very specifically acknowledged that they're not as good at software as they are at hardware, and their effort here is to boost services. They still rely on Google for Android and Google Play for the ecosystem side of it, but they're really trying to add their own layer of differentiation on top of that with various features like S fill in the blank. They have a bunch of different little things now. But also on the hardware side, they still have a little bit of work they can do on the processors. They're looking into doing custom 64-bit processors next year, which up until now they really just use standard ARM cores, but they licensed an instruction set recently, and I think they're going to take up the game on their chip side.
All right, moving on to our next segment, all about Apple. The iDevice maker is now betting big on sapphire glass with a $500 million supply deal with GT Advanced Technologies. Tell us more about this.
So Apple is building a manufacturing facility in Arizona, and GT Advanced Technologies is going to own and operate the actual equipment inside the facility. Apple's making a almost $600 million prepayment to GT. GT will basically repay that to Apple over a few years, but that can also come in the form of credits towards sapphire purchases. And then also on top of that, GT is granting Apple rights to some of its IP related to sapphire growth technologies.
So this is a pretty clear indication that Apple's planning on using sapphire more in its products, because if you think about it, sapphire is only in a couple components right now, like the camera lens comes to mind. What other devices could we be talking about here?
Right, so you're right, Aaron. They only use sapphire in a couple places right now. The camera lens, the Touch ID cover, pretty small areas. And I think one of the biggest obstacles to sapphire adoption in mobile devices today has been the high cost, and this is a lot of money they're putting behind this. So I think that it's pretty clear they have very big ambitions. The most obvious use case would be to use the cover glass on smartphones and tablets. So iPhones and iPads in the future could be covered with sapphire in the front. Sapphire is one of the hardest materials on Earth, so there's a pretty good case here that it'll happen.
You mentioned the cover glass. Now wait just a minute. Corning currently very famously supplies the Gorilla Glass for Apple products. Where does this leave Corning?
So this is potentially a threat to Corning, because Apple initially did catalyze the move towards Gorilla Glass. Theoretically, Apple could catalyze a move away from Gorilla Glass too. Gorilla Glass is still, it's a very nice and growing business for Corning, but it's still not the big driver here. Corning did say that they had 1 customer last quarter that was over 10% of sales. Maybe it's Apple, maybe it's not. In their specialty materials segment, which includes Gorilla Glass, they did say that 3 customers were responsible for 55% of sales. I think it's highly likely that one of those is Apple, because Apple is one of the high-volume smartphone OEMs that uses Gorilla Glass.
This seems like a really big public deal, sort of the sort of thing that maybe Apple would want to keep under wraps. Why is there such a lack of secrecy?
It's a little hard when you're starting to do big deals with publicly traded companies that have their own reporting requirements. In this case, GT is the one that disclosed this agreement along with their own earnings release.
So GT had to.
Right, and it's kind of reminds you of the Authentic deal last year when Apple bought Authentic for about $350 million. Publicly traded company. Can't really hide that, and it's also very clear that they're going to be putting fingerprint sensors in devices, and that's exactly what happened. So while Apple does want to maintain secrecy, at the same time, you can't really avoid some of these in certain times.
Is Apple too big to have surprises anymore?
In a way, I mean, that's probably true. And what Apple doesn't want, but what will inevitably happen now is that everyone knows, okay, hey, Apple's betting big on Sapphire. Let's all go do our own Sapphire thing, which they don't want, but they can't avoid at this point with these types of deals.
The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Apple is looking to expand its number of contract manufacturing partners. How might this potentially affect investors?
So I think what Apple's trying to do here is to ramp up its production capacity by expanding its base of suppliers. Apple uses contract manufacturers that assemble the devices, and supply constraints are so common with Apple product launches these days that I think they're trying to mitigate that. I think the important thing to remember is that this is just on the assembly side of it, and component bottlenecks surrounding maybe things like Touch ID sensors or 7.9-inch Retina panels can still bottleneck production because that comes before assembly.
What do you see? Do you see any risks here? Apple is broadening its supply base, you said, to address supply constraints. But at the same time, doesn't this increase the risk of even more leaks and, again, reducing the number of surprises Apple can show investors?
I don't think there are any surprises for the most part anyways, because, if you think, I mean, you're definitely right that increasing the number of suppliers increases the risk of leaks and things like that. But at the same time, we already know everything that's going to come out ahead of time. So it's almost as if you can't leak any more than what's already being leaked. I mean, everyone knows what's coming ahead of an Apple launch. I think there are certainly benefits because right now they're very concentrated in Foxconn, and Foxconn has had so many controversial aspects related to human labor and human rights that diversing away from them can kind of reduce some of the associations there.
The PR damage.
Right, and also if you get more competition within your supplier base, you can actually
better prices.
Yeah, you get better prices, better margins, and Foxconn is reportedly not willing to lower their prices, which might be a reason why Apple wants to move away from them a little bit.
So this is a great move for Apple investors.
I think it will be, but it's going to be one of those things that might pan out over the long term and behind the scenes in things like helping the margins side of it, but you're not going to see it directly, probably.
Now, if there's one international market Apple investors constantly fret about, it's China. There's been a lot of talk about Apple potentially losing ground in the Middle Kingdom, but that trend might be changing.
So Canalys is now out with new estimates on the third quarter. It believes Apple is now at number 5 in the country with 6% market share. That would actually top ZTE and Xiaomi, who are both two prominent vendors in China. I think that's up from last quarter when they were at number 7 vendor with like a 5% market share. So it's going the right way. And I think that there's some, could be the optimism could be coming back to the Apple story in China.
Why, though? Why is Apple making a comeback in China, do you think?
Well, part of it for the third quarter figures was that the iPhone launched in China as one of the initial launch countries for the first time ever. Again, that was only a very limited impact on the quarter, but I think that there is still some upside. There's been some concern over the 5C pricing, but at the same time, if that's pushing people to 5S, especially the gold option, which will probably do well in that market, I think we could be starting to see more upside here.
What are some other major catalysts that might help Apple grow market share here?
So if we look, going forward, the big one, most imminent and biggest one is China Mobile.
You say imminent. Is it confirmed?
No, it is not. But I think everyone's expecting it, and people have been talking about this deal for years, and I think.
But you say they've been talking about it for years. If they've been talking about it for years, it hasn't happened for years. What makes you think it's happening now?
There have been some more leaks. We've seen some marketing promos spotted from China Mobile advertising the iPhone on November 11th. Could be counterfeits or fakes, but there's a lot of credence to the idea that they will partner, and all the technical aspects are lined up. Also, Chinese carriers, generally speaking, are moving a little bit more towards subsidizing phones to kind of gain more customers. Subsidy model is always a good benefit for Apple since kind of effectively hides their premium pricing, and just generally smartphone adoption in China is still very low.
Can we get you on the record, November 11th? It's happening.
I'm hoping for it. I can't confirm anything, but I'm gonna put my name out there though.
All right, let's check out our final segment, the rumor mill. Nokia just recently announced its Lumia 2520 tablet, but now there's speculation turning to a smaller device. What's the deal?
So now we're hearing talk that Nokia might be preparing to do an 8-inch Lumia tablet for early next year. Code name is the Illusionist. Also rumored to run Windows RT, run a Qualcomm Snapdragon chip. I think it's it would be an aggressive way to target both markets because and now Lumia 2520 goes to the big end for the 10-inch tablet. An 8-inch tablet is kind of the next best thing.
Do you think this is a smart move by Nokia? Do you like the small tablet space?
The small tablet space is really where consumers are really voting with their wallets. Form factors are really compelling, price points are lower, and I think there's a lot of growth coming there. I think most tablet vendors nowadays want to target both markets effectively, the big and the small. Most of the growth might come from the small end of it, but a lot of the profits are on the high end of it. And of course, this is expected all before Microsoft is about to close their deal, and there's also talk of a Surface Mini. Microsoft, if everything pans out, Microsoft could own a big Lumia, a small Lumia tablet, as well as a Surface Mini, its Surface, bigger Surface offerings. So Microsoft could
and
have
the Surface Pro.
Right. So Microsoft could have plenty of tablets by by the time everything's said and done.
All right. That's all for today on Tech Teardown. Want to learn more about the tech stocks we're investing in? Just send an email to cto@fool.com and you'll receive our special free report on our Chief Technology Officer's favorite social stock. For Revenue, I'm Erin Kennedy, and we'll see you next time.